Hello, and welcome to episode 4 of Outside the Vacuum Climbing Podcast, brought to you by Climb Strong. In this podcast, we take things from the abstract to the applied. My guest this episode is Mack, who's been climbing for over 30 years. Though he's a sport climber at heart, Ty is a generalist in climbing with big wall free ascents in Yosemite and Zion. He's climbed ice, he's climbed mixed routes, he's done a little bit of everything. Ty also owns First Ascent Financial Planning, where he works as a certified financial planner. So we dive into a little bit of that as well. A few notes about today's episode. We do talk about nutrition, we talk about doping and PEDs, as well as a bunch of other hot takes. So hope you enjoy. Hi, welcome to episode 4 of Outside the Vacuum podcast. I'm so excited to have you on. I know you've listened to it a little bit and we talked about this the other day, but just to kind of give a framework for how the conversation is going to go. Most episodes of season 1 of this podcast are going to follow a similar framework. Every once in a while, we'll do like a one-off thing. So we're in the process of planning what our next one-off thing is going to be. But this episode, we're going to catch up a little bit, nerd out about something that you and I discussed behind the scenes. And then we'll talk a little bit about like non-climbing media and then answer some listener questions. So heck yeah. Any questions or comments, concerns before we get started?
No, not at all. I'm psyched to be here with you today, Carter.
Heck yeah, dude. I always joke that it's always so funny to pretend like we haven't been talking for the last 15 minutes as soon as we hit record. Heck yeah, dude. So what all have you been up to lately? What's your climbing and training and all of that been like?
Yeah, I've been super psyched lately. I mean, I'm always psyched, but I'm particularly psyched. I got a fun project at our local little Chaussee limestone crag that unfortunately has been quite wet, and is getting wetter as we speak because it's snowing. But it's this really cool route that's challenging for me right now. And I had a huge link on it the other day. I sort of like low pointed it from the lowest point. The first two bolts are really wet, and but from above that I sent to the top, and so like it's just right on the cusp. So
Mm-hmm.
next go. But that's always it's an exciting phase in a project to have gone from where like couldn't do the crux boulder problem to like, man, I'm gonna send this thing from the ground as soon as it dries out, or else I'm gonna like plaster a bunch of tinfoil all over the wet holds and send it while it's still wet. That's probably what's gonna happen.
For sure. Yeah. What is the breakdown? Like how long is it?
It's what is it? I mean, not the biggest crag. It's like a 15-meter climb, and it basically has kind of it's like a 13A to a rest, maybe 12 plus 13A, but cool climbing with like big moves, a knee bar to a big rest, but it's the whole thing's steep. So it's one of those rests where you're like, you get great recovery, but it's far from no hands because it's on steep rock. And then there's like a long V8 boulder problem, that sort of culminates in a kind of a hard sequence on slopers and pinches. And then it's done. You roll onto the slab. But it's just a, yeah, super fun route. Like that's sort of what gets me super psyched. But I've got so many little funky mini projects here in the Tetons, and I can get obsessed about any little piece of rock. So it it doesn't take much. And I actually just got back from a Joe's Valley bouldering trip with my family. I've got two sons, 10 and 12, and we were with a bunch of other families, and the conditions were perfect, and it was so fun. So yeah, I like little rocks too.
For sure. Yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah, you were saying last time that y'all spent most of the time in New Joe's.
Yeah, and I guess we sort of did that again because it was right next to where we were camping, and it was cold, and it's nice to have the early sun up there. But man, I love that place. What have you been up to lately, Carter? What's your climbing scene these days?
It's kind of funny. I feel like I'm always talking about like what I'm doing that's not climbing when people are like, "How's your training and everything?" And I'm about to do the same thing. So I've been spending the last couple of months just trying to work on getting a little bit more athletic and durable. So I've been doing a lot more like lifting and kind of taking a break from hard falls for a little while. So I've really just been like lifting and running and then board climbing for the most part for the last couple months. But the fire is returning. I'm like sorting out my kit to go top rope soloing some in the next week or two and trying to get a little bit more psyched on like a little adventure-y stuff, which happens to me every summer. Every summer I'm like, I'm gonna get into running and get back into trad climbing and just like go do big link ups and things. And then sometimes I get after it. Sometimes I just follow the psych for like 6 weeks and then I'm like, oh, it rained. Oh well, on to the
So,
next.
how far are you from like Linville Gorge? Is that a place that you go?
I used to spend a lot of time there. So I go there a couple times a year now. I'm like 3 to 4 hours out,
Mm.
depending on like traffic and everything. But I was actually there a couple weeks ago for work. I work on the side for the North Carolina Outward Bound School. I've been like a essentially a climbing guide for them for about 10 years, like 9.5 years, but I haven't worked every season. And one of the cool things that we did at our staff training a couple weeks ago was we climbed a bunch of the classic like guide routes in the Linville Gorge, but on 20-meter ropes. But like really like 15 meters of climbing. So we were climbing these like classic kind of short multi pitches in like 10 to 12 pitches. It was awesome. Really dialing in transitions and helping mentor some newer climbing guides and everything. It was super fun. Have you spent any time in North Carolina?
No, I've always dreamed of going to Linville Gorge. Um, my buddy Matt Childers, he's like my best climbing partner ever. I apologies to like all my other climbing partners. We climbed together a bunch back in Flagstaff like a million years ago, and we just had really similar interests. And I just love him. He's an amazing human too. I I haven't seen him in many years, but he would always rave about how cool that place is, and so it's on the list.
So I kind of wanted to ask you some questions before we dive into like our main topic, which is marginal gains, and particularly in the context of like big wall and trad climbing. I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about someone who's been really exemplifying some of these ideas in not just climbing media and the pro climbing scene, but just sort of like helping redefine what is possible for like gear climbing and like these really like technical and nuanced forms of climbing. Have you been keeping up with what Connor Herson has been up to lately? Like, have you been watching the Black Diamond videos or have you seen the Mellow Tour or anything?
I have. Sadly, I haven't seen the Mellow Tour, but I've been following his career avidly, and yeah, so impressive, so inspiring. The one thing that jumps out, like I guess on the topic of Connor Herson, I'd like also to give props to his dad. This is me as dad mode, but like his dad is a legend, Jim Herson. I actually sadly have never climbed with him. He's kind of like a friend of a friend in the Bay Area, and but absolute legend. I think he did the third free ascent of the Salate, but he started working to free climb the Salate as a weekend warrior, like right after. I mean, I don't know about right after, but not long after Todd and Paul did the first ascent. So probably sometime in the early to mid 90s, and I think he sent in like 2003. But I mean, there's just these legendary stories about him. He has this really amazing old school blog that's like still online, like just sort of like text only, early internet zero point 0.5, and he has these trip reports that are hilarious and just like stories about whatever you drive all night, get no sleep in the parking lot, take a rip on the Salafé. And he was trying to do it in quite good style too, like not skipping some of the hard pitches that Todd and Paul did, and like doing the head wall in as few pitches as he could manage. And I just think it's like so cool. So I mean, I think he was a big part probably, and I mean every parent wants to take all kinds of credit for the success of their kid, but I think he must have been a cool and important piece of the puzzle for Connor.
For sure. Yeah, I always thought of like Jim's blog growing up because I'm only a few years older than Connor. I'm maybe like 7, maybe 8 years older than Connor, but like started climbing around the same time. So I was reading Jim's blog back in the day. I like stumbled like across it at one point and was like, oh, this is like the Dirtbag Diaries in written form. You know, like it's this really almost like poetic nature experience under the guise of like a trip report. It's really cool.
Yeah, that's one of those hidden internet gems. But then just as far as like my read on Connor, the thing that just like jumps out at me so much is just how well he moves, right? He just climbs loose and he looks comfortable and he's got amazing mobility. And I mean, I was looking at his bio on the BD website and he talks about how he's like famous for being able to like throw in a knee bar or a bat hang like anywhere. And I just think that really comes through. You watch him on like that thing at a no in France, and he's like double toe hook, like no hands rest. He's just comfortable there. Um, and I just love the way too, where it's and this has always been true of hard like trad climbing with quotes, is that it's nothing like easy trad climbing, right? Like I think we have this picture of like people grinding up these hand cracks and like climbing really statically and 3 points of contact with the rock. But like hard trad climbing is just hard climbing. It's hard bouldering protected by whatever kind of gear is around. And so he just climbs like a great boulderer or a great sport climber. He just like goes for it. And I don't know. That's the thing that strikes me. And that's the thing I kind of like love about watching his career. He's just a climber and he happens to apply it in a way that's like not always on bolts, but he's just like to be out there sending everything. And yeah, I think it's exciting for the future of climbing. I watch the guys on the World Cup circuit and they move like that, or maybe even better. And if Serato decides to just to like, I mean, take it outside and quit focusing on being the world's best comp climber, I mean, boy, what's he gonna do?
It's really cool. Yeah. I feel like the other aspect is watching Connor like in interviews and videos and everything talking about his process. It's like so analytical. You see people diving into the nuance in like sport and bouldering where they're like, oh, I need to grab like this hold with this finger on the crystal and then do this. He's that, but like the added layer of the gear. It's like, oh, I'm going to unclip, put the gear in my mouth, pull this move, plug the gear, do another move, clip it. It sort of adds to the complexity and like the mental puzzling of the climbing rather than it just being like cowboy vibes where it's like, oh, I can do this in a more dangerous way, so why not? It almost feels like there's not as much in the middle between the two ends of hard trad climbing. There's like cowboy vibes, like bull riding. You just have to stay on for 8 seconds and whatever happens, happens. Or there's the super analytical Tommy and Connor and Beth Rodden style of climbers where it almost adds like to the puzzling and the cool athletic performance. And I think that there's like room for wherever you want to be on that spectrum. It just feels like it's almost like an inverted U. Like there's a lot of people on either end and not a lot of people in the middle.
Totally. I think that's an interesting observation. I mean, to me, the person that exemplifies the cowboy side is like Cedar Wright. I mean, I've
Mm.
known him since like whatever the year he started climbing and watched his career. And I mean, that's him, right? Like he just like his superpower was just that. I mean, he loves it and he does it a lot and did it a lot. And he just like from day one, just like went for it. And yeah, I mean, that works too. But it is cool to see the other side of the spectrum, the person who's like whatever, a Stanford engineering student and super analytical and like a V lots boulderer. You put all that together and oh my god,
Mm.
look out world.
It's really interesting too, kind of watching Connor Herson and like Pietro Viti, like their parallels in hard trad, because Pietro is like such a boulderer and such a like European comp monster from the last few years. Connor free climbed when did he climb the nose? Like 2014 or something when he was like 12. He like free climbed the nose a long time ago and has sort of been attacking it from like foundational granite movement over the years. Whereas Pietro is like, I don't know what his personal history is, but it almost seems like he's more of like that European, like, let's build a monster type machine. And they're both doing some of the coolest things in a really similar style. And it looks really good when they both do it.
Yeah, that's I do like that point, and I've often thought that there's several tracks to being like whatever, a good big wall free climber, like if you want to send an LCAP free route, any LCAP free route, like it is possible to go the like Cedar, Wright, Renan. Some of those guys have sent an LCAP free route, and they just like ground out the time on granite and got really efficient and got really good and put in the time and incrementally work their way up to that. But the other super standard thing, right, is that you're like a 514 sport climber or a V10 plus boulder, and then freerider is not going to be that hard for you if you figure out the basics and spend enough time. I mean, Andre going to the Dawn Wall was, I think, a classic version of that. He put an incredible amount of time climbing and moving on all kinds of rock, but not on big granite slabs particularly. And so I think that approach is proven to work really well. You just get to be an amazing climber in any style, and then you can translate it. And the better you are, the more margin you're going to have on like, oh man, this like whatever V7 or 8 boulder problem on the boulder problem pitch on freerider just isn't that hard. I feel like Connor Herson is both of those, right? Like he has that incredible foundation of he's been getting drug up LCAP since he was almost in diapers, but he's also like crushes in the gym and on boulders and on hard sport climbs. And so if you put both of those together, then like, wow, that's really going to be a path to do anything in the world.
I kind of catch myself saying things like it's easier to get strong than it is good. So let's really focus on getting good, and then the strength will go further. Like that sort of like mental trap. But I feel like Connor Herson, Pietro Viti, like Adam Ondra are like, why not be good and strong? Like put your time and energy into being good, and then
Right.
whatever you have left, put that into being strong, rather than all your eggs
So
in one
much
basket
better.
or the other.
Right. I mean, I've tried to rely on the more on the goodness my entire career, but I still come up against it. I'm like, man, I just need to be a better boulder and a little bit stronger. And so, yeah.
For sure. I feel like this is a perfect segue into kind of our main topic. When I was designing this podcast behind the scenes, I kind of thought that there was a gap in not just climbing, but almost like sports media that wasn't connecting the academic with the applied. Because that's really where coaching shines. It's not that we're like reading papers and then talking with people and like nothing in between. Like the art of coaching is taking the science and then turning it into like the people first ideals. And part of that is understanding like what to focus on. Like, yeah, this person has super glaring weaknesses or super specific strengths and superpowers, and knowing when to spend time and energy on different things is part of the art of coaching. And I think one of the most interesting concepts that I've seen in not just climbing, but like sports in general, I, I I might be falsely attributing this, but back in the day, there was a cycling team called Team Sky. But they're like this really famous cycling team that was super dominant for a period of time in like the 2010s. And they basically coined, or at least I'm attributing them with coining the idea of marginal gains. So when you're operating at a relatively high level compared to your personal ceiling, marginal gains is the idea that you're not going to find one thing that's like a 50% difference maker between like sending the route and not. It's the idea that we might not find one 50% thing, but we can find 51% difference makers that can help us get towards this goal. And so things that they were doing were like investing in understanding what foods upset people's stomachs when they're riding on the bike, understanding like when should we be communicating with the athletes. And when I think about forms of rock climbing that are particularly complex and leave a interesting puzzle to solve when it comes to the idea of marginal gains, I always think about like expanding things to big wall or more complex forms of climbing like trad, multi-pitch trad, that type of thing. Because the more transitions you have, the more moves you have to do, the more logistics you have to organize, the more opportunities there are for like small things that have a big downstream effect. So that was a really long-winded intro into our nerd topic for the day, which is just like marginal gains in big wall and trad.
Awesome. I got so many ideas on this topic, but I just want to throw one additional concept on the top of this. I think this plays in so perfectly. Again, I also work as a financial planner. I'm kind of like a economics nerd too. And I think the idea of compounding is what really ties in well with this. So compounding is the idea that like compounded over time, tiny little gains like an extra 0.5% of interest makes this huge difference in the long run. And I think that's where like the marginal gains get supercharged, like you say, when you talk about like big wall or any sort of longer route, right? Like the classic example is just efficiency and time. Like if you futz around on LCAP for an extra 10 minutes on every pitch, right? LCAP, most the long routes are over 30 pitches long. You just wasted 5 hours. So that's the way that those marginal gains, 10 minutes a pitch doesn't sound like much, becomes 5 hours. If you're doing nose in a day, like 5 hours is like the difference between like making it down to Curry Village and having a pizza and like bushwhacking down East Ledges in the dark. So I love adding that idea of like the reason marginal gains, like marginal, they're small, but compounded over time or added on each other, lots of gains in lots of different aspects of our climbing. I'm deeply convinced that it's gonna make a ton of difference.
How do you think about like the interplay between like snowballing compounding ideas and then like compounding over time? Meaning like you have two or three things that are going to interplay on each other and snowball and sort of build momentum that way versus one thing that sort of adds to itself over like a given time interval. Do you feel like there's a synergistic effect in those, or do you find that like it's too much to think about if you focus on too many things at once? How would you like parse that out?
Hmm. I guess I would think in my mind it's not an either or thing, right? Like if you improve one small aspect, like one topic I want to talk about is fueling. Like if you improve that and you fuel better on every long route you do for the rest of your life, like huge win. But then if you do like fueling plus skin plus perfect like efficient big wall tactics, hauling with the least effort, like you can stack the marginal gains, but they're also going to compound over time. So I don't think it has to be a dichotomy. I mean, I think the more of those little things you stack, that's what separates probably like the great and the super successful that send all kinds of things and those that don't. But also every one of those marginal improvements, I think, and some more than others, like a lot of the physical training stuff, we talk about this all the time, right? With Climb Strong coaches, really will compound over time because if you're like nailing your training and your sleep and stuff, and you're getting stronger and better faster, like those things are also going to compound over time. So I think it's like both. And I guess there is always a question, and maybe you have some insight into this, is like, I mean, how many things can we focus on at any given time? I think there's probably with every individual, right? You can't just be like throw the kitchen sink at them and you need to improve like all of this stuff, right? You're just gonna have overwhelmed athletes and they're just gonna be like, oh my God, where do I start? Versus like probably in practice focusing on whatever the biggest miniature marginal gain that you can, the highest leverage one, and doing that first, and then trusting that if you dial that, you can work on the next and next and next, and they'll both combine synergistically, but then compound out over time. I guess that's how I see that.
I fully agree. I love that you brought up nutrition because I think that's a great example. Is like a lot of people view marginal gains as like, oh, what supplements should I take? How should I time my creatine? When should I like take this homemade electrolyte mix that has like whatever in it? Like, yeah, that's all great, but also the first step of that is like, are you drinking water? Are you getting enough of your macros? Are you getting enough calories? And I feel like marginal gains are sort of conflated. And I think really it's all about like once you have these big systems dialed, what are the remaining things that you need to focus on? I love that you brought up nutrition first. What are some of the nutritional strategies that you think are like worth discussing for a couple minutes?
Mm. I want to talk about fueling. That's what I'm like really psyched about right now. So, and I want to hear your thoughts on it too, because I'm increasingly thinking this is a big lever in our climbing. You dropped some like cycling trivia, so that suggests that you're gonna have some real insights here. But here's what I've been thinking about, particularly for like sustained output exercise. And again, I'm suspecting you know way more about this than I do, but I have this impression, my outside impression, cycling has undergone this massive revolution in fueling, right? Like people went from like whatever, they were carbo loading the night before and like whatever, I don't know, thinking about it a little bit, to all of a sudden today, it's my understanding that like say in the tour, people are just like crushing carbohydrates the entire race. And I read that they're trying to consume like up to 140 grams of carbs per hour. And they're taking like specially formulated things and they're like specifically training their gut to handle that much because it's like you or I couldn't hop on a bike and eat 140 grams of carbs an hour. I mean, probably our stomachs would explode. Um, so I understand there's this fueling revolution in endurance sports. And I feel like this is the endless story of climbing is we're kind of like 10 or 15 years behind that, right? But like to my knowledge, I don't know anyone's like I want an athlete to test this. I want to test this myself, but like right, like has anyone tried this or like how much difference could this make if you really perfectly fueled for your LCAP free in a day mission? I mean, that's the kind of thing that's got to make a huge amount of difference there. Yeah, what do you think about fueling? Is this a false lead dead end or could this be a big deal?
I honestly think that fueling and like nutritional timing is one of the least talked about, but maybe lowest hanging fruit factors for athletes who are doing pretty much everything like at maybe a B or B plus level. Like if you're not eating enough is step one. And then it's like, okay, when are we eating? Right. And I think that like timing is where like most sports are at right now. I think climbing is still in the let's eat enough stage. So if you look at the conversations that people were having in cycling 10 years ago, like you said, that's kind of where we're at in climbing now. With that said, like I think the research that's coming out about like how much sugar and how many carbs you can absorb per hour, especially once you train your gut, is really interesting. They used to think it was, I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but like, let's say 100 grams per hour or 120 grams per hour is what they thought you could absorb. And really what that came down to was we were just seeking out like one specific type of sugar. So whether that's like table sugar or some sort of carbohydrate, what they realized is if you combine like fructose, so like fruit and sugar, like different forms of sugar are can be absorbed in different pathways once you max out the pathway. And I'm kind of butchering this and giving like second grade science level, but essentially it's like once all those like chairs are full, you can start absorbing things in a slightly different way, I think. The issue is like most climbing, we're not doing 8 hours of pedaling at 250 watts or whatever. The closest thing we have to that is like big link ups or big wall speed climbing or nose in the day type adventures. And I think that that's where it's super important. And then the other thing is like the timing in order to prep yourself for tomorrow's adventure today. It's like, okay, you get to the ledge, you dig out your biffy or you set up your portaledge and you're like, okay, what do we do for the next 8 hours so that we're not bonking later? I sort of think of it as like, what is the graph of like energy versus intake? Like most climbers like enter pretty high and then they bonk and we're really good at bonking for like 8 hours. We're not really good at like keeping that a little higher and then like hitting the precipitous drop as soon as we like run out of fuel or whatever. Um, how do you feel like your experience as an athlete has impacted like these these thought processes?
Yeah, interesting question. I was actually having a conversation about this with a friend at the crag 2 days ago. But I think it's common in the like mountain athlete world where you're just like rambling around the Tetons and maybe linking up some peaks or doing a long ski tour, is that you often don't think much about nutrition. You want to be able to perform pretty well in whatever state, including like a fasted, like way under fueled state. And so my climbing partner the other day was talking about how he likes that. He likes fasted training and forcing sort of these deprivations on himself so he can like perform well when he doesn't bring enough food. He's on search and rescue and whatever, you run out in a hurry and just don't have the luxury of being properly fueled. So there's that end of the spectrum where like, but if we ratchet over to the performance side, which is what I'm thinking about with my athletes or what we're sort of talking about here, I mean, there's no earthly way you're not going to perform better properly fueled. And so that's where like I feel like having more knowledge and more understanding of what works for you as an athlete, what you can pull off as far as planning ahead and bringing the right amount of food and water. And on the performance side, like whatever, like climbing a couple Teton peaks is just not that close to the many the people I hang out with physical limits. And so you can get away with anything. But like LCAP free in a day, even for like elite athletes, is like really, really hard. And so over there, again, marginal improvements on the outer limits, you just got to get all that stuff right. So with my coaching, I feel like a lot of times I'm just like hammering on people, like just as a first thing. Like I have a couple athletes who are trying Moonlight Buttress right now, and I'm just like bring more food than you think you need. Force yourself to eat. Like just stay fueled. I mean, when I've done that route before, I've been cramping on the like last 5-10 pitch, and it's not a super long route, but it's got a whole bunch of pitches of 5-12 in a row, and it kind of stacks up on you. So I think there's that level of like just like fuel more, bring more water, bring more food. You're gonna perform better. The next athlete I have that's trying to, well, if I get an athlete who's trying to do LCAP free in a day, I'm gonna like buy him $150 worth of like high tech gels and whatever the cyclists are using with the sodium bicarbonate, like in there at just the right amounts, and like send him up with this and force him to test it for me.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting, and I think like I'll put the caveat that like we're not dietitians, like this is us or whatever. It's the same way that we can talk about like managing an injury, right? Like without overstepping our scope of practice, we can talk about these things in general with our athletes and with each other without it being like a weird thing. As an aside, sodium bicarb on a big wall while wearing a harness is an aggressive move if you've never tested that like on the ground or something before. So just for our listeners, sodium bicarbonate is baking soda, and it can help with uh like hydrogen ion buffering, I think, like in your muscles. So it helps the pH not drop as low when you're like reaching muscular failure. But it also gives you what's called osmotic diarrhea from the sodium. So it sucks all the water from around your guts into your guts, and then it has to go somewhere. So I would recommend if you're gonna like supplement sodium bicarb, definitely test it on yourself first.
Right, but I mean, whatever it takes on the margins, right, Carter? If they have to wear like adult diapers, if that's what it takes, I'm willing. I'm willing to try that.
Other thing that I find is really low hanging fruit, fueling wise, with athletes is thinking about like what has a chronic effect and what has an acute effect. So things like protein timing, fat timing, a lot of that stuff is more of a chronic effect. So it like helps with your adaptation to training or your ability to recover between like repeated bouts. So it's like, okay, did you get a big bolus of protein after your session? Or like did you fuel well rather than just drinking 3 beers and going to bed in the back of your truck when you like got off the wall day one or something? A lot of the things that have a more acute effect are things like caffeine timing, hydration, and like carbohydrate timing. But like those are the three things that I've seen anecdotally. I know the plural of anecdote is not evidence, but like I've seen it anecdotally in myself and my athletes is like if we can time your caffeine depending on your tolerance, if we can time and help improve your hydration and then time your carbs, then we're going to have a lot easier of a time figuring out what else we need to do fueling wise. Um, what are some like hydration strategies that you've had success with? Like I've got 3 drinks within arm reach right now while we're recording this podcast. But when you're on a big wall and maybe your water's in the haul bag, you have to work to get these things up and down and you have to carry it in or filter or boil. What are some hydration strategies or tricks of the trade when you're in these like more austere environments?
I think the biggest thing is like for wall climbing is getting your partners to carry all the water. I mean, I'm kind of joking. But honestly, so this is where this kind of like bleeds into tactics and stuff too. But this is why, like, if you see a lot of successful big wall free ascents, is you've got somebody, maybe a team, in like full support mode, right? Like, you just physically can't carry enough water on your person, or you're just carrying an extra like 20 kilograms. And so there's a lot to that, right? Like, you just gotta bring enough, and you gotta figure out some efficient way to get it up there. And the very best thing is to like have your partner carry it. Or whatever, like have a great hauling system and it's in a pack, and then you foot haul on some tiny little like flossy tagline that weighs almost nothing. I mean, those are the kind of things that like make it or break it there. That's probably the standard thing, right? Like, you lead, you fix, your partner's either following on a mini traction or jugging. You like foot haul on this really light tagline, your pack that has a bunch of water in it, and then you just drink as much as you can stomach and get ready for the next one. But I'm like a bad, I don't really practice this super well. I drink mostly coffee most of the time. So yeah, I'm not the best one. Okay, I could talk about fueling all day, but there's a lot of marginal gains to be made here. And so I think for this next one, I have some super, super bad news for you, Carter.
Okay,
And
I'm ready.
the topic is skin. And how old are you, Carter?
I'm 31.
31. Okay. I just turned 49. And I hate to be the one to break it to you, but your skin is going to go to absolute shit as you age. Like, it's just this one way descent into skin purgatory, but your skin does not get better as you age. So do you have any tips for me? My skin is completely falling apart. Like, it tears more easily, it heals more slowly. Like, skin is terrible. And I have a buddy that I climb with a ton, who's an absolute, what is he, over 10, 15 years older than me. And like, yeah, I see my future. And he's like, gets these splits that last the entire summer. So anyhow, what do I do about my skin?
Yeah. I find so wall skin and like bouldering skin are like two very different things, right? Like I sort of think of like big wall skin or like just I call it like wall skin, similarly to how I think of like people who work construction or work as a route setter or something. Like, yeah, there is the skin impact of the actual climbing. And then there's also the impact of like hauling and bashing your knuckles every time you try to like undo your portal edge. And like all of those little things add up. So I think the first thing is like prevention is the best medicine for any and all skin things. But the number one thing that I'm a big fan of is like wearing gloves. Like if you're a route setter and you can get away with wearing gloves until lunch to prevent like frying your skin on fiberglass, great. If I'm jugging, unless I'm actively like putting chalk on my hands and climbing, I'm probably wearing gloves. Like I probably swap in and out of my gloves more than I swap my shoes, even on like a longer climb, just because I don't want everything to just add up and make my skin just like weirder and thinner and glassier and all those things. The second thing is like if we were to boil down what we're looking for out of skin, I find it's a lot easier to chase a target than it is to run away from things like splits and flappers and gobies and everything. So it's like what is like the null hypothesis? Like, what are we trying to chase? What are we trying to prove or disprove? And I think number one is like we want elastic skin that is dry. So we want it to be pliable and we want it to be like durable and a little stretchy, but we also want it to be dry. And that dichotomy is like where skin really starts to fall apart, because most of the time you have dry skin and it's not sweaty, you're not greasing, but you split really easily because it's a little more fragile. I'm a big fan of combining like skincare tactics to sort of aim for that middle. So I'm a big fan of like antiperspirant products like Rhino Skin, Antihydral, Carpe. You can play the pros and cons with aluminum versus methanamine based antiperspirant products. And there's like positives and negatives to all of them. But also you got to do the stuff that's going to keep it elastic and feels like it's going to make it greasy, but as long as you wash your hands, it won't. I usually just have a chapstick that's reserved for splits. Like I just have a chapstick that lives in my climbing bag that I'm probably not going to put on my face, you know? I use it to put under a band-aid and that kind of thing. So chasing elastic but dry skin is the way I like to do it. The other aspect is like as you age, obviously things are going to slow down, but I wouldn't say that it's purely due to age. I think some of it is like lifestyle stuff too. And like I know like as I get older, I'm like, oh, my skin is so much worse, when it's also like I'm not climbing quite as much. And so I'm climbing a lot in a short amount of time and I'm just like blasting through my skin rather than spreading it out a little bit.
I feel like you're blaming the victim here, Carter. I'm feeling
No, I'm blaming
no, I'm just kidding.
myself. I'm blaming
I'm just kidding.
myself.
No, I like that. I like that.
Yeah.
Don't just use age as a crutch. Right. No, I appreciate that.
I don't think it's a non-factor. I just think it's sort of like when people say like their metabolism slow down. Like, yes, it's true, but also like if you walk to class in college, your metabolism's not slowing down when you're in grad school, you know? You're just using it a little bit less or using it differently. The other thing is like, what do you do once you split? Or what do you do like once you get a Gobi, that type of thing? Are there like things that you've run into repeatedly that you're like, I just don't know like how to deal with this, or tips and tricks you have for like dealing with some of these like common skin issues?
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate that overview you just gave. I felt like that was a pretty succinct skin masterclass. I'm a super fan of super glue because when I get certain types of splits, for me, it's the only thing that works. I just like glue them shut. Um,
Mm.
uh, Even like the other day, whatever, I was bouldering at Joe's and like just like shredded my knee climbing like a hack, and I just like super glued it shut and put a bandage over the top, and it was awesome. Like it healed amazing.
I always feel like I look like a crazy person when I forget to clean out my skin like Ziploc pouch at the airport. Like I forget to take things out because I travel a lot for work. And I'm like, they're like, is this super glue and a razor blade and like a tube of chapstick? You're like, yeah, sorry.
That's funny. And the other thing, like not all super glue is created equal,
Mm,
right? Like I'm there's this like Loctite gel super glue that comes with this long tip and this like twist off locking blue lid, and that stuff is like light years better than everything else.
mhm.
The more gel style with a really sharp pointy applicator, if you get the cheapest super glue out there, the really liquidy stuff with a bad applicator tip, like good luck. You're just gonna like glue your hands together because you're gonna spill it all over yourself. So there's things like that too.
Yeah. I can't remember who said it, but it might have been Will Anglin, or maybe I heard him say that someone else said it, but it's the idea that like skin is the currency that we buy sends with. And I think like that's particularly important in like big wall climbing because you're just doing so much more with your hands and doing so much more that can impact your skin beyond just like hyperextending your distal knuckle and splitting, you know? It's like the number of times that I've ruined my skin on a bigger climb or on a more adventurous trip that wasn't from climbing is more than I have ruined it from climbing. So I think again, like the prevention is super important, but like don't burn yourself on your stove or like pouring hot water on yourself, cutting yourself with a knife. Like these things are going to impact your trip way more than just like bashing your knuckles or like getting a goby. And I think like the more you can wear gloves, the less likely you are to cut yourself or burn yourself. But also, like, you got to pick your battles. Like, everyone's got their own tolerance for that stuff.
Um, I mean, I've been climbing for a long time, and when I first started climbing, they actually those hand jammies, like crack gloves, did exist, but like no self-respecting climber would ever be caught dead in them, and we would just mercilessly tease and laugh at anyone who used them. But boy, I've reversed courses on that, and I really appreciate the fact that those things are ubiquitous, and I think they're amazing. I always have a pair. I have a pair in my sport climbing pack because, um, for instance, this chossy little limestone crag I climb at a lot has one overhanging crack that some of my friends can do without jamming, but like for me, it's super steep and it's super sharp. And like the only way I can send this thing, it's like 13A or something, but like super physical, is by just fully like crack gloves, taping all my fingers, um, and diving in there. I'm a big fan of tape. And again, there there's like style and ethics around this. And I think some people have strong feelings about this, like the people that live at Indian Creek and think about this stuff. But I'm I tend toward the like, boy, pretty much anything that can give you an edge, like just do it. Moonlight Buttress is a good example for me. It's really useful for me to like tape my fingers up heavily so they're just a little thicker because there's a bunch of baggy fingers, especially the kind of the red point crux is this thing we call the black crack, and it's like rattly. And if I like fatten my fingers up a little bit with some solid amount of tape, especially on my index finger, it just like feels so much better. So yeah, maybe it's cheating, but like, boy, I take every advantage I could get like that too.
Well, it's like on the monster.
I mean, yeah, and the monster, like what on a do you watch Girl Climber or like hear about Emily Harrington? I mean, I think that's classic. Like two pairs of shoes, whatever. That's not cheating. Like
Mhm.
your her feet are small. And that's like I think that's clever outside the box thinking, and a bunch of tape on your fingers I falls in the same bucket for me. I'd say give it a try. Some people just hate the feeling of it. It's very individualistic, I think, and there's certain times for sure you're climbing some thin hand crack and you that's really hard for you and you don't want hand jammies on. I mean, you're like, good luck. So depends upon the climb, depends upon the person. And like you said, prevention is still trumps everything, right? I mean, there's so many ways to get it wrong, right? But is you overstoke and you go to Indian Creek and you don't tape up properly for your first route and you get a nasty goby and you're just hosed for your whole trip, right? Like your only hope is to like get fewer gobies early in the trip. So like you said, prevention.
Yeah, for sure. Um, in the same vein, like similarly to you fattening up your fingers, I have really fat fingers, and I'll sometimes use tape to compress so that I can fit in pockets and stuff easier.
Yeah, and good tape too. Like
Mhm.
I just there's a huge range of tape quality. It's nice to have multiple pieces of multiple widths. It kind of is a drag to like split a fat strip into smaller strips. So it's like just get it all, get the high quality stuff. And it has a lifespan. The other day I was climbing with a buddy and we were on this really wet boulder problem that we were snowmobiled into in the Tetons. I mean, classic Teton adventure, but his tape was like just too old and it had gotten like cooked in a car or something and it like no adhesion. And so it's like one of those things you gotta, yeah, use the right stuff. It's gotta be fresh.
The next thing that I kind of wanted to ask you about is like I was gonna ask you about like hauling and transitions and like fix and follow and like these more like technical things, but I don't really want to get into just like the nuance, like trying to in an audio format describe like fix and follow versus short fixing versus like like we're not trying to get into that, but just sort of thinking about like what are technical and tactical considerations to the way that you like bring your partner or bags up or the way that you like fix lines and then wrap back down to the like the tower that you're going to spend the night or something. Like what are some of the considerations that you're sort of thinking about or like speeds up the process just a little so that you save 5 hours on the nose, that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a big topic. And I do think it sort of blurs also into ethics and style. And yeah, I just think you want to be deliberate and thoughtful about how you want to climb a route and how bad you want to climb a route. The classic thing I think, so to say this is for El Cap, and these days there are so many more really skilled climbers free climbing on El Cap, such that many people are doing ground up successful free ascents, and they're like stepping off the ground and they're hauling all their stuff and they're like sending the pitches in order, and that's sick. Like it's such better style, and so I think you have to be sort of aware of that. And I think our sport is evolving toward that because standards are rising, and it's harder maybe to be outside of that. Like maybe you can't just like fix huge sections of free rider anymore. I think that day's probably gone because it's too crowded. And if you're trying to like endlessly rehearse a bunch of these pitches, you might just be getting in the way too much. Um,
I obviously think like the style that you climb something should relate to the ethics that you want to climb it, right? That you want to climb it in. It's a lot easier to be chasing an ethical consideration and then climb it in that style rather than climb it and then try to figure out what bucket you gotta now like tell people or think about your climb in, right? Like it's one thing to know that you're gonna like aid through the hardest section, and it's another thing to be like, I didn't aid through it at all. And everyone's like, we saw you stand on the bolt. Um, but like, how do you think that plays into the like light and fast versus low and slow, like that type of thing?
right. I just think it's interesting. So I think it's important, right, to be deliberate about it. Like decide what style you want to climb something in, and then make sure it's in sync with what's possible. I mean, I think it's a huge issue today on LCAP with crowding and stuff. I mean, I haven't spent a lot of time on LCAP in a long time, but I just think that it's no longer possible to like fix some huge section of free rider and have your ropes hanging there in the way so you can endlessly rehearse it. Like, there are too many people doing ground up ascents there, so that's not possible anymore. And so I think you just have to be aware of like the bigger scene and the bigger picture. But those variations in style just can make huge differences in what's possible for an individual. So here's a classic example. I think like I sent Freerider in 2007 and used like the best possible tactics I could because it was really hard for me. So friends had like from the top all the way down through the enduro corner was fixed, and once we spent days, I mean by ourselves luckily because there's no one else on there, like rehearsing all those pitches. And we like it was also the haul up to Hollow Flake Ledge was fixed too, so we would do like missions up to like rehearse other sections. So we were like using up a lot of the route, but there was just hardly anyone on the route, and so it was totally fine. And then when I went for a red point push, we had gear pre-stashed, all like multiple spots, water. We climbed to the alcove and took a rest day in the alcove. After this really long physical day, you finish with the monster off with, you're just like wrecked. We took a full rest day on the wall. So like tactics that allowed me to send, like that's what I needed to do. But you couldn't necessarily do that today. You're just going to have to get everything even more right, and you might have to take a rest day on the wall, and you might have to like have a beta map drawn out for the enduro corner, whereas the French dude behind you can onside it, but like you might have to do that. And you might have to use a knee pad. Like I used a knee pad on the enduro corner for the like slopey laybacking. You can get these good knee bars on the first 30 feet. And if you want it bad enough and you're willing to get all those things out on the margins right, you're just going to have a higher probability of success. But it's got to be in sync with your goals and what's possible on the route in the current conditions and the current world we live in. One thing I had on my list, and again, I'm not even sure if this falls into the category of marginal gains, but is movement efficiency. Um, I mean, I think it is, but it's also so foundational. Like it feels um, like it's maybe not a marginal gain topic, but is like fundamental to everything we do. But I think it feels really relevant to like long routes and big walls. Is that idea, boy, just that when you're moving over many pitches, many days, even the compounding physicality of it, um, and how we sort of counteract that by just expending the absolute minimum amount of effort that we possibly can to move through any terrain just becomes so important. And I struggle with this all the time with athletes I coach because I it's just a really tough topic to like coach or like train in the gym, right? Like I feel like it's one of those things that just endless repetition, mileage in similar terrain, similar rock type feels like feels like the path to that efficiency. But I'm like deeply convinced that it's the thing that sets apart, like whatever the Tommy Caldwells and the Alex Honolds that can climb whatever Watkins, Half Dome, El Cap free in a day. They're just expending wildly less effort on all the easy climbing in a way that's really hard to replicate without that much mileage on the rock. Do you have any thoughts about efficiency?
I think of it sort of as like fuel economy in a car. It's like, what is your mileage? What gas are you putting in? How big is your gas tank, right? Like we just spent a long time talking about like what fuel you're putting in and like when to fuel up and that kind of thing. We also talk a lot about like how to improve your gas tank. Like not just on this podcast, but in climbing training in general. It's like get fitter, get stronger, get all these things. But how do you improve your fuel economy? Because it's one thing to have an 80-gallon tank in your little like Prius or whatever. An 80-gallon tank in like a dump truck is not going to go as far, even though it's the same size tank. And so I think like one of the best ways to improve the economy is trying to raise the floor of that efficiency from underneath. So to get better at climbing 510 efficiently, like climb a bunch of 5.8 and 5.9, and then eventually start climbing 510 efficiently. Don't like, yeah, you can climb 512 or 513, but really attack those efficiencies from below. And then I think the other thing is like there's no way to replicate a big day in the mountains. Like, yeah, we can put a backpack on and walk on a treadmill and then go do 20 pitches in the gym and then put a backpack on and walk on the treadmill. But that's not as helpful for listeners like myself, who I live in the middle of the flattest part of North Carolina. Um, and to train these efficiencies, it's like, okay, I have mileage under my belt in my career that I can lean on like experientially, but it's still going to take some time to like iron out these efficiencies.
There's something about maybe the forced economy of the big days that is like you get tired and therefore, I mean, I've heard this talked about in like Nordic skiing coaching is that like your technique is paramount and having some long sessions is useful because you actually can fall into kind of like slightly more efficient stride by doing those really long workouts, long days. So I think there's something to that. I have a friend who's a former Division 1 cross country running coach, and he was talking about how what a huge factor just running like stride economy is in that, and that for like younger runners to develop that, they just need to log a ton of miles. It's not like fancy video analysis or anything. They just need to like run a gazillion miles on roads or tracks. And I kind of think there's got to be some analog. I mean, climbing's way more complicated motion, so I think that's a confounding factor. But still, I think there's no substitute for just like maximum pitch count. If you're thinking about just true climbing economy, maximum pitch count on the most similar style of movement, rock type, whatever, to the extent you can replicate that, that would be my default, I guess, pitch count.
Yeah. I always think of it as like pitch count is the way to measure like the session. And then like how many shoes did you go through is the way to measure like the
Like that.
season or the career. And obviously like I don't know. Like some people just have like Garbo footwork, and it's like, okay, you're just gonna
Right.
go through more shoes. But like
Right. And if you
for
need
for
a
an
lot of rand patches, then like something's wrong. Then we've got to
yeah,
do some footwork drills.
exactly. But like I really like the idea of like when I think of my own training, like the number of shoes that I go through or like the speed at which I'm going through shoes is actually a thing that I consider when I'm looking at my volume because I'm not interested in just counting pitches and counting boulder problems and everything or counting feet on the treadwall or whatever. Like most of the time, I'm more interested in like climbing for my set amount of time and hitting some more basic goals for the session. But then I'm like, oh, if I haven't blown out a pair of shoes in 6 months, I'm like probably not getting that much volume if I'm climbing 3 or 4 days a week, like versus if I'm going through like a lot of shoes, I'm like, okay, maybe there's a skill issue or I'm maybe overdoing it or something. And you see that in running too. Like obviously mileage matters the most. Like you need the number of miles you need to get fitness and to get economical in your movement. But it's also like we need a long run, we need some intensity, we need some intervals. And you see that a lot in climbing is like we need some bouldering, we need like a volume day if we're training for this kind of thing. Um, but we also need to think about like, okay, how many miles are we getting a week? How many pitches are we getting a week? How many pitches are we getting a month, a year? And the more times that we can increase that thinking holistically, like the more efficient you'll get, or just the more efficient at suffering you'll get. Like some people just only get so efficient, but they can hold a level of inefficiency for a really long time. Um, like you sort of think of like the two versions of ultra runners. There's like the X like D1 cross country runners who can just hold like a 6 minute mile pace conversationally, and they're really good at like being efficient at a high intensity. And then there's the people who are like David Goggins or oh, his name just went out of my head. One of these like Sportiva dudes, Kapitrick, is that his name? Doesn't matter. Um, he's really good at just suffering for like 30 hours, like he's maybe not quite as fast, he's maybe not quite as efficient in his stride, but he can hold instead of holding a heart rate of 135, maybe he's holding a heart rate of 150 for the same amount of time and he's just good at suffering and good at holding it together. And you see that in climbing too, like there's sort of different camps of big wall tactics and dealing with these like breakdowns.
Right. I feel like in the mountaineering world, right, like the Eastern Europeans and Russians were always like infamous for they would have these like climbing competitions in the winter on some
Mhm.
godforsaken peak and they could just like outsuffer everyone. And yeah, that's maybe an underappreciated skill, suffering.
For sure. I think Tommy Caldwell is a great example of someone who has both. Like the man can suffer and he's super efficient. Like he just did this crazy link up with Cody Townsend, who's like a ski mountaineer. I'm going to get it wrong, but they did like all of the peaks in the Sierras or something in like 10 days and like something crazy.
Yeah.
Um, and like both of those guys are just so efficient at the thing that they're best at. Like Tommy's a super crazy efficient climber. Cody's a super efficient, crazy skier. But then they were also so good at suffering on the thing that wasn't quite their best. And I think in the topic of marginal gains, like one of the most important things is like know thyself. Like are you more of a diesel engine? Like are you just good at like holding this level even if it's a little less efficient for a long time, or do you need to be more efficient and make your energy go further? Um and then also like I would just say you can never be too strong. Like being durable is
Right.
so important.
Totally. Right. Let's never forget that we can never have too much finger strength. So don't forget that.
Can't forget it.
It all comes back to the right one arm hangs on tiny edges on Instagram, right? Like that's still the highest and best.
Yeah. Um, I feel like we could keep going for like another like 2 hours. So I think we should plan
Yeah.
to maybe if you're open to it, like revisiting this conversation in a couple of weeks and kind of like maybe like diving into like some of the follow-up rabbit trails from this. But um I want to be aware that like you have things you need to do the rest of the morning. So I'm gonna kind of like keep us rolling. But do you have any like parting words to our nerd topic before we kind of move to the next segment?
I guess my overall advice would just be, I mean, with all this stuff, right? It's a cumulative thing. It's a lifelong thing that can compound. But again, if you don't like obsessing about these little things, like I do, and so it's interesting to me. But if it drives you crazy, like don't do it, or don't do it until you need to do it, right? Like you can still just focus on the big important things, like climbing a lot and sleep and nutrition, and like whatever 90% of us, most of the people I coach, can still improve just by like climbing more and becoming better at movement and getting the basics right. And then think about adding these things out on the margins when you need to, if you need to, and and if it doesn't drive you crazy, like if you're into it, then great, knock yourself out. But don't neglect the fundamentals to spend time out on the margins obsessing about whatever the viscosity of your super glue, unless you're into that. How's that for
Yeah.
parting words?
I think that's perfect. I think yeah, like everyone has their biases and you and I are both really into like the really specific stuff. So it doesn't take any brain power for us to talk about like leukotape versus Metolius tape versus whatever else. But for some people that is a huge time, energy, brain suck. And it's maybe better to use that like bandwidth on other stuff, whether it's climbing more or figuring out a way to find childcare that can watch your kids during the day rather than just at night or like whatever it is. And so um I think like being nice to yourself and just like not forcing it if you don't want to. Very few of us are paying our bills by climbing more efficiently. So one of the only things I asked you to come prepared with for this episode was like a piece of media that you've been really interested in lately. For new listeners to the show, it doesn't have to be climbing or coaching related. In fact, it very rarely is. But I kind of wanted to ask you, like, is there any podcast or book or album or movie or anything that you've been like particularly intrigued by lately?
Okay, I got a couple here. I'm going to start with um, a person named Tyler Cowen. He's like my favorite public intellectual. He's an economist, I think at George Mason University. But to me, he's like one of the most thoughtful and interesting humans that I've come across. He has a lot of media out there. He has a podcast called Conversations with Tyler, and it's a little wonky. And then he has a blog called Marginal Revolution that's like the longest running economics blog in history. Is It's legendary. But here are two things I've learned from Tyler Cowen that I just love. One is that he totally changed the way I read, which is funny because I've been reading for a lot of years before I discovered Tyler Cowen. But he has this framework where basically you should just like read widely. You should like start a million books. Like, don't be tied to the linearity of like picking up a book, reading it from start to finish, and then putting it down. I had this huge hang up for a ton of my life where it's like a moral thing. If I started a book, I would start at the beginning and I would read the whole book, and I would feel like guilty if I gave up on it. So I ended up like churning through books that weren't really that interesting to me or lighting me up, or like I could have spent my reading time better. So his idea is that like always have a bunch of books going. I still don't really read fiction like this much because I feel like fiction deserves, at least good fiction deserves to be read cover to cover. But with nonfiction, like don't don't try to churn your way through the whole thing. Just like pick it up, like leaf around, read a chapter. If it doesn't grab you, like give the book to a friend, find something else on Libby. Like just be like ruthless with your reading time, and just like don't be attached. And it's been a game changer for me where I feel like I read so many more interesting books because I like churn through things and I abandon things, or I just read part of something and get something interesting out of it. Um, so I learned that from Tyler Cowen. And then also he just has this beautiful way of interacting with the world, of like looking for what he can learn and what he can appreciate from anyone's point of view and from like any piece of media or any conversation or any idea. And I think the world we live in, there's a tendency, and I feel like it's a trend, and what we blame everything on the internet and social media and whatever, but like we're often looking at things with like, what's wrong with this? Like, what fault can I find with this? What can I how can I look smart by like poking some holes in this person's argument? And I mean, there's a time and a place for that, and I think that does add to the discussion. But honestly, I just think it's so much of a better way to interact with the world, to every idea you encounter, even from someone whose politics you don't agree with. Like, what can I learn from that? And what can I appreciate about that person's worldview? And I think Tyler Cowen exemplifies this for me, this sort of open minded exploration of ideas. And so um, I think it's quite powerful.
That's really interesting. I remember you and I talked maybe like 6 months ago, and you'd mentioned like not reading things as linearly, and I like took that to heart immediately, and I like was flipping through last night. I was flipping through the accidents in North America, like the ANAC of like this past one, like 2025. Um, and I used to always feel like I got to read them in order. Like I got to read all the avalanche burials of Alaska before I can make it to like Nevada. Um, and I don't know, like I think like that's a really interesting way to approach reading and like information literacy. Like not just being literate and reading, but also like understanding things is like you don't have to you're not going to remember every word you read anyway. And so like it's not unethical to cherry pick. Like it's more just like exposing yourself to these ideas that might change the way you think or might change the way you like approach things. Um are there any things on your Libby or on your shelf right now that have been really like captivating you lately?
I mean, I'm a huge fiction reader. I'm reading a Dennis Johnson Vietnam novel called The Smoke Tree right now that's just like so good and so beautiful and like heartbreaking. Um, the other thing, I'm also my one of my other professions. I'm a financial planner, and I'm also reading this book called The Financial Wisdom of Ebenezer Scrooge, and it's kind of a cheesy personal finance book with like with a particular cheesy title, um, but it's written by this like icon in the sort of like essentially like the human factor of financial planning world, like the psychology of financial planning. And it's this guy Brad Klontz and a co-author whose name I'm not going to remember, but they um they developed this idea of money scripts, which are kind of like these unconscious scripts we have about money. And I to sort of pivot this back to climbing coaching, I feel like this is a really useful thing for us to think of even more broadly. I think we have all kinds of scripts or narratives in our that running around in our minds that affect the way we move around in the world, and that some amount of time diving deep in our own psyches and minds and understanding those. I feel like I come across them all the time in athletes I coach, these sort of self-limiting scripts that are deep rooted, unconscious, and they lead to self-limiting behaviors. And maybe it's like, I'm not a good slab climber, or like I can't hold like this, or I'm too short, or I'm too tall, or I need to be different, or like I think we could all find a million examples of these. And sometimes they're adaptive. It's not like they're not necessarily negative. The scripts and narratives we have in our minds can be really powerful too. But I think that this book sort of hammers on this idea of money scripts. And I think broadly in our lives, time thinking about the subconscious scripts we have running and how they affect our behaviors and whether it's positive or negative. I just think a useful endeavor to think about those things.
That sounds fascinating.
And it's really readable. It's this tiny little book.
I've been listening to a band called Synestia lately. I don't know how to describe them other than a like blackened deathcore band that samples orchestral music. I grew up playing classical music and being in orchestra and all these things. I played the cello for my whole life. And that was sort of my gateway into metal. I found like there was a lot of overlap musically between like especially the like more like raw black metal, like that sort of European vampire chasing you type music, and like the orchestral stuff that I was playing. This band's really interesting because it scratches this itch in my brain that I didn't know was there. Like I'd been listening to Lorna Shore and Apocalyptica and like all of these different things like forever, but they sample like the Four Seasons by Vivaldi and then put like really harsh vocals, huge distortion on guitars, like blast beats on drums. But it's sometimes a little like sludgier and like a little slower and like easier to digest. And their song off one of their more recent EPs is called "The Wretched King and His Hollow Throne," which is super dramatic. The artwork is straight out of Lord of the Rings. It seems like and the title is like a little melodramatic, but it's a really cool song, and it like scratches this itch in my brain that is present from growing up playing classical music, being a big metal listener, but it's sort of this like opera orchestra blackened deathcore like weird vibe. So um and then I've also been I'm on the waiting list on Libby to listen to an audiobook of Quiet, which is like the science of introversion, I would say. It's like a nonfiction book that was really popular a couple years ago. Several people have recommended it to me lately. I'm really interested in reading it. But what I found is for the same way that you're saying, like this is one that I feel like I should read like front to back. So I'm going to listen to it as an audiobook. I've been having trouble finding time to actually sit down and like chew on it slowly and digest it,
Mm.
and prioritizing that versus like other things. So I just got off the waiting list this morning, so I'm excited to listen to it this afternoon.
Nice. I actually just barely listened to a podcast interview with her. Susan Cain, I think,
Mhm.
is the author. Um, and that's actually something that I love doing with nonfiction books that I maybe don't quite want to read, even like actually read, is you listen to an hour long podcast interview with the author talking about their book. And a lot of times they just do such a good job of telling the best stories and explaining the key ideas. I think there's a balance. Like I think that's a bit of a trap too, and I do appreciate the like you actually get the book. There's a time and a place where you do want to sit quietly with your book and read it cover to cover. And then there's a time and a place where like I don't know, maybe this in my life right now I can't I can't give this this idea 6 hours, but I can digest some of the best of it in 45 minutes.
For sure. Yeah, I find it really interesting. I'm also just a slow reader and distractible. So if I listen to an audiobook, I can get through it in a reasonable amount of time versus if it's a book, I'm like, oh, I lost my place because I was lost in thought thinking about this thing, or like, yeah, my eyes are tracking, but like no one's home. Awesome. So before I let you go, I have a question of the week. So every episode, we put the call out to ask for questions, whether they're anonymous or not. We have a bank of questions. So if people are interested in sending us questions, they can send them to me or Climb Strong on Instagram. They can email them to us. But this question is from our friends over at Sequence, which is an app that we partner with for our like self-guided climbing training programs. And they asked, where do we see climbing training going in the next like 2, 5, and 10 years? So we don't need to like full on crystal ball, but I think it'd be fun to kind of give some hot takes that we can revisit. Um, but let's start with like in the next like 1 to 2 years, what are some of the things that you think are going to change in like the climbing training scene?
Timestamp this and come back to it in 5 years. That'll be fun. Um, I guess where I'd go with this first, I'm curious. I'm super curious to hear your answer to this. I've been as has the entire world, right? Thinking a lot about AI, using AI a lot, thinking about how that is going to impact our lives, my kids' education. And I feel like I always cycle back to the idea that the human touch, people are going to put a higher premium on it and it's going to become more important. I think we're seeing this already, even like before AI really accelerated, where there's a ton of information out there and like great training plans that could work just fine for many people are just increasingly a commodity free, the commodity with a price of zero. And there's just like so much information out there and ideas out there. And I'm sure right now, Claude can write you an incredible training program that's like going to be really good for you um, if you could follow it and yeah, and implement it in your life. And I just feel like when I think about how I work with my athletes and how I see other Climb Strong coaches working, it's really fun to develop relationships with these interesting athletes, interesting human beings from all over the world, and be partners for accountability and to like dive deep into tactics and mindset when that feels like a limiting factor and spend time on the physical stuff and make sure that their training is working for them and that it's we're progressively overloading, we're doing all these physical things and getting the adaptations they want. But I really feel like that's the thing that AI is, I don't know, feels less likely to do well, is to build relationships in a way that's really fulfilling and engaging and inspiring and like makes us want to do better things in the world. So I don't know. That's maybe kind of a long-winded romantic thing, but I think that's the thing that AI's never. I shouldn't say never, but is less likely to do terribly well in the medium term. So yeah, I'm sort of like bullish about that. What do you think?
That was actually what I was thinking for the next 2 year, like that first like smaller timestamp is I think there's going to be a influx of people thinking that they're going to create the perfect training plan through like these large language models, but really that's just synthesizing what is publicly available, which is a lot of times like the like science or like the literature or the things that are publicly available. And what I notice the most important aspect of training is adherence. Like I would so much rather have someone have something that's 50% perfect that they can do 100% of the time than something that's 100% perfect that they only do 25% of the time. And I think that that is the trap that I see people falling into when they use like Chat GPT or Gemini or Claude or like any of these other things to create their plan is it doesn't take the human time and stress and oh, you like needed to go to the grocery store with your toddler before the training session. Obviously, that's going to impact how you're feeling that day, like that human touch. I do see it kind of becoming a more helpful tool, or at least an option for a tool for the coaches. I don't think it's going to replace coaching, but I think it could make it so that you could have more athletes on your roster so that you can spend less time and energy on the programming and more time and energy on the coaching and like those human interactions, which I'm not the one to decide if that's ethical or not. In the next 5 years, I think like not just combining AI, but also wearable technology, I think is going to change dramatically for climbing because I think we see climbing on that 5 to 15 year lag. And what we've seen in rowing and skiing and football and like all these sports with more money and with like more science going into that is more wearable technology and more granular data to collect on at least the highest level performers. So things like the Tindeck, the Whoop, Aura Ring, all these things are great, but finding more ways to quantify like training load as a climber because it isn't the same as quantifying training load as a runner or a lifter, I think is interesting. And so things like HRV, resting heart rate, that type of thing isn't as helpful for climbing. It can be part of it, but yeah, I think that like wearable technology is sort of where I see it. And maybe even combining that with like algorithmic processes from AI could be an interesting way to extrapolate the data so you don't have to wear like an Aura ring while you're climbing. At least on the research side, hopefully on the more applied side, like more like wearable technology.
Interesting. I was actually gonna throw wearables into our earlier conversation because I was super curious. I know nothing about them, and so yeah, this will have to be continued because I'm super curious how people are using them even
Mhm.
now in ways that are useful. Certainly notice. I feel like every World Cup, boy, the speed climbers, the lead climbers have some little band around their wrist that looks high tech, and so
Mhm.
um, yeah, I'm super curious about that. Out on the like the cutting edge, it seems likely to me that we're also just going to see increasing specialization. I guess it's just maybe commentary on where we're at in the sport right now, but that people can still essentially compete at the cutting edge of boulder and lead in the comp world, or like Jakob Schubert can be one of the best lead climbers in the world and still basically just a whisker away from being one of the best boulders in the world. And now that in the Olympics we finally have three disciplines, just be interesting to see how far things can get pushed once people are really getting out there on their narrow focus, really trained for just one type of rock and one energy. I don't know.
No, I agree. What do you think about like in 10 years? So, two Olympic cycles from now or around 2036, where do you kind of see like climbing training evolving?
Oh boy, that 10 years feels like if I think about, well, I don't know. I mean, simultaneously like forever and maybe not that long. I'm so curious what AI is going to do to the broader world. I have a really smart friend who is utterly convinced that my kids are going to maybe live to 150, that we're going to make these step change leaps in sort of longevity and human health. I tend to be like deeply skeptical of that. Like if I had to put money on it right now, I would say no way. Um, but I think it's a fascinating thing. I mean, it would disrupt everything about our society. But like if we really did see sort of human health breakthroughs on that scale enabled, like it seems like AI is the logical place to get us there with fundamental science. I mean, boy, all bets would be off. And I think we would see human performance in every sort of aspect. I mean, count me in. I'm like I said, I'm 49 years old, and if I can reverse the aging process and squeeze out a few more really good years at the crag and boulders, I don't know, I'll be psyched.
I feel like that is such a more optimistic view than what I was gonna say for 10 years out.
Right, like Mad Max, right? Like
I'm like, I think when I think of like 10 years out, I'm like, okay, sports that sort of seem to be right at 10 years ahead of us, I'm thinking like triathlon. It's not quite the same money that Grand Tour cycling and even like outdoor track and marathon have. I feel like triathlon or like fighting sports are sort of like if we look at what they were doing like in the mid 2010s, like what that might be roughly kind of like some of the things that we see now. I think the number one thing that I'm interested to see is like doping. Like as more money gets into the sport, especially on the outdoor side, um, I'm interested to see because we don't have like USADA and WADA don't impact the outdoor climbing scene. And there's a huge history of like PEDs, especially in like altitude, that people just kind of don't talk about, you know? Like we don't really talk about the fact that like a lot of Everest ascents have been fueled by like amphetamines. Or we don't really talk about the fact that I don't know, people use cigarettes to curb your appetite. like for sport climbing back in the day. These are things that I'm interested to see how it goes. And as more money hopefully goes into the sport, I think that that also leads to like interesting developments on the slightly more medical end of the scene, especially for outdoor climbing. I think comp climbing and the Olympics and everything will continue to be an arms race. Like, does testing keep up with what people are doing? And that's going to drive performance and things in some ways, just like it does for all sports. But I'm really interested to see how this turns out in outdoor climbing because it's really interesting to see like when we revisit old records, when we revisit these things, we're already seeing development on those fronts in sports. Like triathlon is a great example where like a lot of the people who were the most dominant in like 2010 to 2020 are getting popped now that testing things have become more advanced. And that's not just in cycling, but like triathlon in particular,
Right.
I feel like has a similar amount of money from my perspective.
Right. That is fascinating. And it's funny because I feel like we don't really know what people are doing on the cutting edge for doping until after the fact. But like in cycling, I have the vague notion that we're in this interesting phase. Well, I guess again, the big caveat of like there's probably something happening that none of us are aware of, but that people are now breaking the splits on the famous climbs finally in potentially just because they're crushing like nutrition training, like all the training has gotten so much better that you can now do better than a doped climber. And I mean, same thing in baseball, probably. I mean, I don't know what
Mhm.
Otani. I mean, whatever. He's like such a better baseball player than like than right than Mark McGuire and Jose Canseco and like Barry Bonds back in the battle days of the steroid era of baseball. So like, I feel like there's like optimism too because just by getting better at just over time better at training, nutrition, all these things, like humans can do greater things without doping. But obviously, there's there's still the incentives to being doing the whatever the illegal or unethical stuff, or I don't know. Fascinating topic. I mean, like if I got my testosterone pegged to like 1500, would I boulder better? Like maybe I'll try it. I don't know.
I find the other interesting thing is we talk such a big game in climbing about there's no cheating, only lying when it comes to like outdoor ethics in particular. It's like, okay, well, what if someone climbs V19 and they're like, yeah, I took like 3 cycles of Anavar and then I was like on BPC 157 and I had collagen for my skin or and you're like, okay, well, at what point is this like now cheating even though you're not lying about it? And I don't think that anyone is
Fascinating.
don't know where to draw those lines yet because I don't think we're quite there. But like there are grumblings, like people have always been leery of certain people for like taking steroids, and there have been people who've been popped in testing, but most climbers who get popped for like more traditional steroids or like recreational drug use in the comp scene, like um, but yeah, I'm interested to see how that goes. And I think money is going to be the one of the biggest deciding factors is like if climbing stays as is, I think that there's less of an incentive for those like really on the fringe things. And climbers are also like we're like a little bit on the cowboy end of the spectrum. Like there's not as much doping as far as I'm aware in street skateboarding as there is in like I don't know, if you blood test like a horse at the Kentucky Derby or or like untested powerlifting or something.
I wonder though. I mean, I agree. I mean, in a general sense, I think maybe more money and it changes the incentives a little bit. But I also feel like so many climbers are so obsessed with their performance everywhere on the spectrum that if the things are available and that people are going to be pushing that envelope even if they're not getting paid.
Mhm. For
I mean, I
sure.
don't know. There's a lot of obsessed humans. I mean, that's what I love about humans is that humans do crazy things in every aspect of the world and push every envelope and are so complicated and irrational. And yeah, I don't know. Oh, it's gonna be an interesting next 10 years. I guarantee it. I can't wait.
Yeah, I'm excited. I just want to thank you so much for taking more time than I even told you it was going to take for this episode. And yeah, thank you so much for spending your morning with us over here. And yeah, do you have anything that you want to close out by saying?
No, not at all. Thank you so much too, Carter, for doing what you do, and putting out this cool content and being an inspiration. So it was super fun. I enjoyed it.
Absolutely, thank you.